Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Orr, and I'm the Executive Director of the UK and Ireland Spill Association. And this is the first of a series of 4 webinars that with the support of our members and the support of OAMPS, who are our event sponsors, we intend to do over this year. And they're, in a sense, I suppose in the modern parlance, they would be called thought leadership. But as I'm somewhat older, I would just regard them as, we're just really keen to share some of the knowledge that our members have and some examples that they're able to deliver on what we would consider to be sustainability in spill response. So why is sustainability important? So let me just share my, no, I don't want to share that one, share that presentation. So why sustainability important? Well, I think we're running out of the tolerance of our planet to allow us to abuse it any longer, is probably a good way of putting it. And so we have only one planet, and we have an increasing population living on it. And if we continue to abuse it in the way that we are at the moment, there won't be much of a planet to live, not necessarily to my children, but perhaps the life of my son's children will be affected by it. And I don't think we can really allow that to happen. So we had a conference last year where we had a presentation on sustainability, and it was given by Matthew Renshaw from Admiral Allen. And it was really, it stimulated quite a lot of conversation. And out of that came the thought that actually maybe we should present for our members, but also for anyone who's interested in it. We should put together some webinars on sustainability. And then following that, we were then asked if we would collaborate with a company called Collaborative Media, ironically, who were putting together a program on sustainable business. And they said, would we be interested in participating with our members on a program called Sustainability in Spill Response? And so the members well, 4 of the members and four of us all collaborated together, and we filmed a program which is being edited at the moment and will appear on Sky in their business section sometime in February or March. So in a sense, it all seems to tie together, and sustainability is a theme. And what we want to show through this is that there are ways of approaching sustainability in business, and particularly within spill response, without it costing the earth, and with making some perhaps managerial choices or operational choices in the way we go about running our businesses, such that we can perhaps all tread a little bit more lightly on the world when we conduct spill response. So what is UK and Ireland Spill Association? Well, it is the trade association for marine and inland response companies in the United Kingdom. Actually, could everyone put themselves on mute, because we've got quite a lot of background noise, and that's a bit off-putting for the recording, but also for those who can't hear. So basically, we represent contractors, manufacturers, consultants, and also those who actually who conduct spill response are accredited members, and they're accredited through International Spill Accreditation Scheme. So what is sustainability? In 1987, the United Nations defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is actually a pretty cool definition, I think. And the United Nations produced the Sustainable Development Goals, which form the framework improving the lives of populations around the world and mitigating the hazardous man-made effects of climate change. And I think most of us will be familiar with these goals, but may not be aware that there are 3 which are particularly relevant to us. 13, climate actions, which calls for integrating measures to prevent climate change within development frameworks. 14, which is life below water, and 15, life on land, which also call for more sustainable practices in using the Earth's natural resources. So driven by these global goals, all responsible businesses should work now and in the future in the most sustainable means possible. They should plan to improve their sustainable performance over time. And this means that work should be planned and delivered as sustainably as possible. And there should be a continual improvement. Okay, so if you're a small business employing 10 guys and you're struggling to pay the payroll at the end of the month because people haven't paid you, then sustainability seems like a goal which is out of reach. But when one of your vans comes up for renewal, why not look at what the options are to replace it by modernizing the van, as opposed to buying a second-hand van? Perhaps buy a more recent second-hand van, which has got a Euro 6 engine in it. So when it's being driven, it uses less emissions. When you're involved in a remediation project, why not think about, in the planning of it, what's the most sustainable way that I can deliver this project? And just make incremental changes, because the incremental changes add up to a lot when you total them all up at the end of the year. So the purpose of these four webinars will be to illustrate ways in which our members are dealing with delivering spill response in a more sustainable way, to deliver some case studies of sustainability in practice, and then we'll hear from RSK Raw and ATG Group on those. Adrian and Alan are then going to talk about some good examples of planning for sustainability. They're going to hand back to me to talk about what we should be aiming for and why it is important as a benefit to the environment and to our clients and our staff. And then after that, we'll take questions, and we'll then look towards the next sustainability webinar, which will be in April. So we'll take questions at the end. So what I want to do is to start off with our case studies. So the first is going to be delivered by Rory McKinnon, who's a business manager within RSK Raw, and he'll be handing over to Duncan Sanders, who's the Director England of ATG Group. So I'll stop yakking on and I'll hand over to Rory.
Thanks, Mark. I shall just get myself set. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yeah, it's available. Yeah.
There we are. Cool.
I nearly forgot.
Right, hopefully you can all see that.
That looks great, Rory. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, I should get started. So thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. So we're here to talk about sustainability in spill response. My name is Rory McKinnon. I'm the business manager for RSK Raw. So I'm just going to talk to you today a little bit about doing the right thing and how making small changes, as Mark has already said, can have an overall positive impact on the sustainability of your projects. I'm going to run through a very brief case study and then talk through some of the specific details that we implemented on this particular project and other projects more widely, some of the things that we implement to make them more sustainable. So this particular project involved the loss of around about 45,000 litres of liquid fertiliser from an above ground storage tank. The fertiliser impacted a local watercourse and ultimately ended up in a large recreational fishing lake. The results of this were considerable loss of fish stock and then the wider impact to controlled waters. So the initial response works focused as usual on the containment and the recovery of the fertiliser, which comprised of excavation of soils and pumping out of the surface waters. The soils were then stockpiled on site, and ultimately the soils and the waters were then spread on the surrounding farmland under consent. But I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in one of my later slides. So once the emergency works were over, we're then left with this large impacted lake and this continual ingress of fertiliser contaminated surface waters as it continued to trickle downhill. And we decided that given the lake had already been impacted, we would just use it as a large-scale storage container for those contaminated waters prior to the treatment of those waters on site. So following some research and development, some bench scale trials, we were then able to deploy a small water treatment system that comprised of a nitrate selective resin filter media, not something that trips off the tongue very easily. The system itself was automated. It had inline sensors, and where we were unable to use other power, it was run on generators, which were able to be run on HVO fuels, as well as supported by some solar panels. So the system was expected to operate for about 6 months, but we managed to achieve our remedial targets in 12 weeks and obtain regulatory sign-off. Hurrah! So, case study presented. I'll go on and talk about some of the specific things that we implemented in that project, and with a view to kind of what we can all do to be a little bit more sustainable. So I've kind of broken this down into a few sections. You may disagree with the sections I put some of these things in, but we can talk about that later. So the first thing I thought of was the logistics and planning of dealing with the spill incident. Now for us, and on this particular project and our wider project portfolio, we have a national network of offices, which means we can attend site quickly, which reduces the amount of driving required to attend site and reducing our CO2 and other emissions, as well as reducing the amount of time that we spend traveling and the resulting cost savings. Driving is one of our biggest areas of CO2 emissions, and it's one that we can have the biggest impact on. The other part of our business is the in-house design of site-specific equipment that can be mobilized by the smallest vehicles practicable. This reduces emissions again and reduces the number of trips required, as well as the reduction of materials required in the construction of these systems. This system in particular was installed with low noise equipment where possible and noise abatement barriers, that allowed the system to be covered and to blend in with the surroundings. This reduced the visual and noise impact of our system on the surrounding area. It maintained the use of the surrounding fishing lakes by fishermen and allowed people to continue to visit the area and maintain the local economy. As I mentioned, we unfortunately had to use some generators, but the generators that we use are able to be run off HVO fuel, which is a more environmentally friendly alternative to diesel. So it reduces emissions, and it's a lower long-term risk to the environment if a spillage were to occur. The next component part was research and development. So drawing on other industries to provide the answers to our questions, we were then able to identify this nitrate selective resin filter media as a possible solution. And it's through the collaboration with other industries, the review and the continual reading and self-improvement that we're striving to achieve will allow us to continually develop our line of work and improve on our processes in our industry. So we carried out some lab-based trials on this resin filter media that allowed us to deploy our water treatment system. And the benefit of using this filter media was that it was possible to regenerate it on site using a simple brine solution rather than disposing of it and replacing it with new material, as is often the case with other filter medias. There is a slight caveat to that. When those other filter medias go off site, they do tend to be regenerated. But the use of this material allowed us to regenerate it on site, again reducing the number of trips and the amount of handling required for it. We find that small design features built up together can make a really big difference. So things like the use of diffusion manifolds on the end of these discharge pipes on this particular system, which then minimize the damage caused to the lake and the banks of the lake from the flow of water coming out of the pipes. Very simple, but very effective. And then use of technology. We're all used to technology. When it's used properly, it can be incredibly effective. So we use in situ field monitoring equipment. It gives us live data and there's no delay in the decision making. And it allowed us to target the remedial works into the areas that needed it the most. It provided efficiencies in our processes, as you could see by the reduction in timescale. We also used an inline solar-powered monitoring probe and telemetry system. So the live data was available 24/7 on a web page. It's accessible to all the interested parties, and it reduced the number of site visits required. In addition, it gave us a continual rolling set of data that could be referred back to. The system itself was automated, and based on the readings coming out of that probe, it operated a two-way valve that allowed either the discharge water to be, the treated water to be discharged, or if it failed our agreed discharge thresholds, it allowed the water to be diverted back for further treatment. As I mentioned previously, we also utilized some solar panels to run the low power demand equipment, and that reduced our reliance on generators. Part of this remediation work also involved the aeration of that pond, the lake. The aeration of the water was there to encourage the natural attenuation of that material to occur, and it reduced then the volume of material, one, needing treating, and then two, being removed off-site for further treatment or disposal. And the final slide is our technical skill and knowledge. Ultimately, we are an accredited spill contractor. This means that we've demonstrated our professional capabilities and have signed up to ethical working practices. Because of our knowledge and our experience in this industry, we've been able to identify the relevant environmental legislation, which has then enabled us to find the most sustainable and cost-effective solution for our client, working within the framework of this legislation. And it isn't just one document, it was multiple documents. Ultimately, we were able to come up with a waste management plan for the soils. We carried out some detailed chemical assessment of those soils over a period of time, and we were able to demonstrate that they were suitable for reuse on site. So we were able to then spread that material over the surrounding land under consent, and it saved around 400 tons of material from being taken off site for landfilling. And that's only a good thing in my books. So that's the end of my presentation. And I think in summary, as Mark has alluded to, the small changes can have a massive positive impact on your project. And some of these things can be institutional, so it could be a part of your business and your longer term strategy, but some may be job specific. Have a think about what you may be able to implement to make your company and your projects more sustainable. Thank you.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. That's lovely. If you can just stop sharing and hand over to Duncan. Duncan is the England director for ATG Group, who are based in Ireland.
Good afternoon, everybody. I shall now attempt to share my screen, having been tutored very well by Mark. Let me just see if I get the right presentation. It always helps. There we go. Do that, and then screen sharing. I need to go to
slideshow,
which is just
to the right.
Yeah, just one second. Slideshow, and from beginning. There we go. And then display settings was also something I believed I had to do. Display settings. Swap that. Right, there we are. Can everyone see that?
That's great.
Excellent. I'm so pleased. That was the most stressful part of the whole afternoon for me. So I can now relax and give you 10 or 15 minutes overview from my perspective. Thank you, Rory. Right, so sustainable remediation. Well, that's been something that's been on the cards, gosh, for a good 20 years or so. I was invited to one of the first SURF meetings back in the early days. SURF stands for Sustainable Remediation Forum. And according to SURF UK, which is part of the CLARE initiative, Contaminated Land in Real Environments, the definition of sustainable remediation is a remedy or combination of remedies whose net benefit on human health and the environment is maximized through the judicious use of limited resources. So it's all about judicious use of resources to have the net benefit. There's no point in, obviously, using up truckloads of diesel and lots of resources and time and effort to remove a teaspoon of oil from the ground. It has to be proportionate, is the way that I would describe that. There's a tiered approach from qualitative to semi-quantitative to quantitative. Various tools are available. Gold Set by WSP and Golder have a site-wise spreadsheet-based tool for assessing remediation projects. And there are 6 key principles, which I'll show on the next slide. And the regulators are, which I'm going to focus quite a bit on in my little presentation, the regulator part of it, in actually minimizing the amount of remediation that's required. They're required to take account of sustainability in their involvement in projects as well. So there is something called a certificate of sustainable remediation. And the 6 principles, it's probably quite hard to read that, so it's a little bit small on the screen, so my apologies, but the 6 basic principles are protection of human health and the wider environment, safe working practices, consistent, clear and reproducible evidence-based decision-making, record keeping and transparent reporting, good governance and stakeholder involvement, and finally, based on sound science. So in other words, sustainable remediation is not a cop-out that you just can do some noddy piece of work at half the price to try and save the planet. No, it still has to be robust in all those regards, but it does have some components. Now, somebody, obviously in our office who had far too much time on their hands, decided to calculate how many tons of waste, excuse me, we have diverted from landfill over the years, which apparently is equivalent to 6 Titanic ships. And that's enough CO2 for 1.3 million tons, or 800,000 return airplane flights from London to Los Angeles. Now, the only reason I mention that is that we do all sorts of remediation as a company, and diversion of contaminated soils from landfill is a large part of what we do. But what I'm going to be talking to you about today is a project up in the northeast of England in Sunderland called the Pallion Quarry Hydrocarbon Recovery Scheme. A couple of years ago, we were invited in by the local contractor, Esch, who are building a major dual carriageway through the Sunderland port to the main interior of Sunderland. And they'd hit a problem. The whole thing had ground to a halt because a certain part of the section, which is an aerial photograph you can see here, had meters of hydrocarbons floating on the groundwater at about 20 meters in depth. And this was holding everything up. So we got called in to see what we could do to assist. And the process was really 3 parts: assessment of the situation, regulatory negotiation, and then the remediation solution. So like Rory was saying in his last presentation, the importance of R&D and technology, very much the same for ourselves, choosing the right approach and making it as sustainable as possible. But the regulatory part is an interesting component, at least I think it's interesting, which was particularly pertinent to this project. And I'll try and explain why. So first of all, the site assessment, we came in and did the normal thing, drilled some boreholes, tried to find out where this product was and where it was going to, and find that the geology and the hydrogeology. The circles in red were the ones that had product, and the green ones were monitoring wells. It was moving generally north to northeast towards the River Wear, and 4 wells had product up to several meters thick in places. A little cross section on the right hand side shows you where the thickest levels of product were. So we had a good handle on what was going on. Then we had to, I'm just going to go back a second. Then we had to take all this to the Environment Agency and work out what we were going to do about it and what the risks were. The discussions with the regulator, the EA, were very interesting. because it started, they were concerned most of all about the impact on the groundwater and the adjacent River Wear, and the dissolved phase concentrations from the free product moving through the groundwater into the river. Fair enough, that's what they're there for. I completely understand that. But when they start, their position starting out was a very hard line position where they wanted 99% reductions in dissolved phase concentrations, drinking water standards, and reduction of majority of the free product removal. And this was, a fair point in some ways to start with. But had we just complied with that and said, yep, that's fine, we would be probably on the site for 5 years and spending about 5 times more than we needed to. And people often forget that economics is very much a part of the sustainable tripod: social, environmental, and economic, the 3 legs of the sustainability stool, as I like to think of it. So we had a discussion with them about risk and the realities of what was going on, what the actual impact of the river was, the stability of the plume, and also the limitations of the remedial technology, which is very important, because there's no point asking for the moon if you can only produce Basingstoke. You've got to actually be able to deliver on what they're asking for. So eventually we reached an agreement which was around multiple, they refer to it, lines of evidence, different streams different factors of evidence that could be used to overall assess that we'd done the right job. And these were things like product thickness of the hydrocarbons in the wells, the stability of the plume, the recovery rates and whether they'd leveled off like a hockey stick, which is what asymptotic means, and the dissolved phase concentrations with risk assessment. So this was a very important part of the project, which allowed us to do the minimum amount of remediation required to remove the risk. And that's, of course, what remediation is supposed to do. It's supposed to remove unacceptable risk, not clean up every last scrap of contamination on the site. And that's a very important point, particularly when it comes to sustainability. So a little bit about the actual project. Some of the pictures there you can show what we were doing. The bottom left it was one of the wells. There was 5 or 6 of those that we had. They were pneumatic-driven pumps. The green pipe in the top is air going into the system, producing total fluids, water and free product out of the well. That then went through a system of screening and separation in a container. The free product was stored in the IBC, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, and the resultant groundwater was passed through granular activated carbon filters before being discharged back into the sewer. So it was a dual-phase vacuum extraction assisted remediation system. There's some pictures of the interior of the treatment works and another picture of the wellhead. This is a graph of the total rates of oil recovered, which approximated 5,500 litres over the 18 months or so that the project was running. And this was important because we needed, coming back to the sustainability, we needed to demonstrate to the regulator after a certain point that we'd done as much as we could, and the law of diminishing returns. Spending more money and time and resource on it, but for arguably negligible future gain, and at which point you agree to switch off, which is what we did. But that wasn't quite as simple as I'm making it out, but that was the basic idea. This is a graph of thicknesses of product in the various wells. As you can see, the graph coming down the other way, excuse me, the hockey stick reducing over time. So what were the saying, so to wrap it up, what are the sustainable aspects of the project? Well, you may recall the principles that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the 6 golden rules, if you like: sound science to understand the hydrogeology and locate the central source of the plume. The lines of evidence decision-making with the EA. This was really important. The appropriate amount of remediation was completed and signed off, no more and no less. They were confident that the risk had reduced and that what we'd done was actually preventing any further risk to the river. And therefore, that was agreed it could be signed off, and the planning the planning, I've forgotten what the word is now, the things controlling the planning relating to environmental were discharged. And then they were allowed to continue the construction of the dual carriageway, which I'm pleased to say is now built and operating. But then a little word on the technology as well, just to finish with. We did design very efficient semi-automated recovery plant with a telemetry control system a little similar to what Rory was mentioning. This allowed us to target the hydrocarbons, the light non-aqueous phase liquids, LNAPs, with minimal waste or water extraction. So that was a judicious use of resources and targeting the problem. And then the final piece of the project was a recovery system, which was a solar-powered, fully automated, telemetry-controlled recovery system, which is operating now, which effectively extracts the last little bit of hydrocarbons out of one of the wells, and we monitor it. We go once a month to take samples and to check on it, but it's a very low maintenance, highly efficient system, which is using the latest technology to make it as sustainable as possible. That's it. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to, I think, is it Dan? Is it Mark I'm handing to? At Adler and Allen, and I will stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Thanks,
over to you, Dan.
That's really useful. I mean, now what we will do is we'll take questions at the end, but I'd like to introduce Dan Ellis, who is the Sustainability Manager at Adler and Allen. Over to you, Dan.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Duncan and Rory. So great. I will share my screen 1 second. Hope everyone can see that.
That's good. That's great.
Wonderful, great stuff. So, yes, thanks for having me. I'm Dan. I'm Sustainability Manager at Adler and Allen, and I'm going to take a little slightly different approach here. Rory and Duncan have focused on very site-specific case studies. What I'm going to look at here is all about carbon reporting and how Adler and Allen, how we measure, report emissions associated with our jobs and how we report them to our clients, all of which have got similar but very distinctly different reporting requirements. I would imagine that a lot of you guys are subject to some sort of carbon reporting, whether that's legal compliance or whether that's your customers asking you certain disclosures. I'll hopefully try and explain what we're doing as a business and some practical advice on how you can incorporate carbon reporting into everyday life so that it's not as much of a burden as it might first seem. So first of all, what does sustainable spill response look like? We've had some great examples already today. I'm going to be just focusing here on carbon. I know it's very easy in the current climate to get very blinkered about net zero and carbon in general. That is only one slither of sustainability. There's the social economics, as Duncan was saying earlier, but I'm just going to unapologetically focus on carbon going forward. So this is a bit of a roadmap on how Adler and Allen we're looking to achieve net zero. All the way from when a phone call initially comes in from a customer for a spill, all of our offices and depots were powered by renewable energy. We'll then work our way through to our fleet. So our light fleet, our company cars and vans, they will be moving to electrification very gradually over the next few years. A bit more difficult with the heavier fleet, so the HGVs and the tankers, much more difficult to decarbonise there, but we're looking at lots of opportunities. We've mentioned HVO already today. Great short-term opportunity to replace diesel with a biodiesel alternative, but then looking for other things like hydrogen in the longer term, and also things like hydrolyzers, which is a very innovative solution, which is kind of really making some progress at the moment, which are small units which can be retrofitted to an internal combustion engine, which create a little bit of hydrogen, not a huge amount, but a little bit, which can be injected into the engine to replace a bit of fuel. Normally for HGVs, you can save up to about 10% there. So it's a nice incremental gain that you can do to a big tanker before you swap them out in the future. We're using lots more unintrusive technologies such as CCTV cameras, remote monitoring, and that just negates the need in a lot of circumstances to do excavating work. And in many cases, it can detect spills on tanks at the earliest opportunity and therefore prevent the worst damaging impacts of a spill in the first place. And for my sins, I am a consultant, so I would always advocate getting better data. It might cost a little bit extra up front to get that data, but in almost every situation, if you've got better data, you can make better informed decisions. And then moving on to site, making those swaps. So moving from traditional generators to HVO generators or renewable energy like solar panels, as we've heard in those case studies. Zero emissions mobile plants, so things like electric mini diggers, excavators. They've got hydrogen JCBs now, which are not yet commercially viable for the vast majority of projects, but they're starting to come onto the market as well. As an industry, we do use a lot of single-use plastics, and there are, of course, reasons and limitations around why that is the case. We're handling hazardous materials, we need to prevent cross-contamination. So there is single-use plastics in this particular, our industry can be very effective, but there are other options that we can use in certain circumstances for more regenerative and circular materials. And then just looking at our supply chains, if we can make them as local as possible, as resilient as possible, that can reduce all of the travel emissions to site. It reduces environmental impact, but it also means that the customer gets a better service, that we're there quicker on site to deal with the situation. And you'll see there on the right hand side, I've drawn a very definitive dotted line here. So at Adler and Allen, we do offset our emissions associated with client contracts. So as we work our way towards net zero, we can't do it all tomorrow, unfortunately. Money and other challenges get in the way, but we're working our way towards it progressively. At the end of every year, we look at our residual carbon footprint and we offset our emissions by 150%. So we work with our customers to identify suitable offsets that align with our corporate values, but also their corporate values as well. So they're mutually beneficial projects, which align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals that both of our businesses have identified. And most of them tend to be protection of marine and terrestrial environments. And we also plant trees in the UK as well. Usually we try and find a project that is as close to the locality of our customers' projects as possible. I do realise that offsets are controversial, and there'll be absolutely people who are vocal that we shouldn't use offsets. But my personal view is that offsetting is better than not offsetting, but it has to be the right project with robust science behind it. And if you read The Guardian, you will have seen a lot of bad press about offsets in the last week. Offsets are not inherently bad. They're just sometimes not used in the spirit in which they're intended.
Yeah.
So how do you practically go about measuring greenhouse gas emissions on a job or a contract basis, or even for an entire company? Well, we'll take one example of a job here. So we've got a spill. It's happened on the M11 near Saffron Walden on the Essex border there. And so Adler and Allen, we might deploy a response unit from our depot in Risby, 32 miles north of the site. We might also deploy a tanker as well. That could come from the same depot. In this case, we'll take it from our Waltham Cross depot. We might also have consultants who are home-based who go to site as well. And all of this mileage associated with this job all gets logged, it gets put onto a job sheet, and it goes into our finance package, our job management system, and it becomes an accountancy practice. So all of these things happen automatically in the background. In this case, it's a one-day job, so just one return visit. It might be a bigger job where we're going backwards and forwards to the site. It all gets logged in the same system. From there, what you can do is you can take your mileage figure and you can multiply it by the carbon conversion factor, which is freely available on the UK Gov website, for an average transit van or an average HGV, and that will give you a carbon emissions factor. For us, we've got trackers and we've got a fleet management system which calculates our MPG for us, so we can use that, which is a slightly more accurate way of doing it, but using standard carbon conversion factors for an average vehicle type is perfectly acceptable as well. We measure the amount of water that we use on jobs as well. So we know how many IBCs that we're using on any given job. And also for some more industrial work, where we're doing industrial jet washing with bigger tankers, we know how much water's gone into that tanker as well. So that all gets recorded. When it comes to plant and equipment on site, we could be using all sorts of things from little mini excavators through to generators, drilling rigs, and all of the fuel which goes into that is all recorded. If we are using electric equipment, which is kind of our default green preference, if at all possible, we usually plug in either, if we're on a residential property, we'll ask the homeowner to plug in, or on a commercial basis. And for the majority of insurance jobs that we do for our insurance clients, we monitor that automatically so that we can reimburse the client and those additional costs anyway. And we just use that data to apply it to greenhouse gas emissions. There's also consumable items that we use as part of everyday work. So from absorbent pads through to PPE, balers, and also sample jars. And all of these items, we have got a carbon cost associated with them. So in our finance package, when we're costing up a job or invoicing, each one of these items has a financial cost against them, which we charge a client. It also has a carbon cost as well. So when we're running off an invoice, we can also run off a carbon footprint as well. There is a little bit of effort to put in to calculate a carbon footprint of an individual item in the first place, but once it's done, it's set up, and you can just repeat that process going forward. So we'll take an example here of a litre glass jar. The glass itself weighs about 450 grams, and we take the carbon conversion factor for average glass from the UK government carbon conversion factors of 1.4 tonnes of carbon for every tonne of glass produced. And that gives us a total carbon footprint of that jar, bottle, of 63 kilograms of CO2. Then, when we're on site and we use that sample jar, there's additional emissions as well of taking that sample to a laboratory. So a lot of the time we'll take our own samples to our own lab, or we will deliver it to a third-party lab ourselves, or in some circumstances we will use a courier as well. And in those circumstances, we are not taking account of the entire vehicle, because there will be our cool boxes in there amongst lots and lots of other things. So we only take account of our proportion of that payload. And so what we do is we work out the total tonnage of whatever it is that we're sending and how many miles it's going. And in this case, it's going 346 kilometers up to Deeside. We've taken 20 samples, all weighing 1.5 kilograms each, and that gives us a total carbon footprint of 5.8 kilograms of CO2 from transporting those samples to a lab. And what we're also doing, we're working with our third-party labs at the moment to get a much better carbon figure for every sample which is tested in the lab. We've got average figures for them. We're trying to drill down into a bit more, be a bit more specific about different sizes of samples, different tests. My advice to you guys is, if you've got subcontractors, go and ask the question of them. Request carbon data, because you won't be the only ones asking. They'll be getting these requests from multiple different places. Go and ask. They should have this data, even if it's at a high level to begin with. You can use that information for your own reporting purposes, and then you can work with them to get much more specific figures just progressively over time. And the same goes for waste. Obviously, we want to try and minimize waste as much as possible, but there are certain circumstances when it's not possible, and some waste has to go off site. So same principle again. If you know how much waste is going off site, there's emissions associated with transporting that. Again, you can work out the distance traveled by the tonnage, and then there's a carbon conversion factor that you can apply to that. So in this case, it actually takes 2.5 tons of carbon to transport 150 tons of soil to a treatment facility. So all of these numbers all get put together, and this is just a little extract of a emissions dashboard. We report lots and lots of different metrics to our clients, from financial to response time, but we also include environmental data as well. And we split it up into 3 separate sections. So the emergency response phase to begin with, then site investigation if it requires one, and any remediation. And you can see there, for an emergency response job, very much heavy on the travel to and from site, and some materials in the cleanup. Moving on to investigation, very carbon heavy in terms of the equipment, as you would expect, and then moving through to remediation and validation, lots of going backwards and forwards to site, validating, taking samples, and also materials in terms of the remediation, whether it's bioremediation or a more civils type project. And in this particular case, this job came in at just over a ton of carbon altogether. And so at Adrenaline, what we do is we offset that by 100% to begin with, but we always round up to the next whole ton. So in this case, we went up to 2 tons, offset that with 100% renewable energy project. And then we also plant trees over and above that. So on this particular project, we planted 4 trees. Across the entire contract with our client, we did 240 jobs, all averaging about a ton each. So you can see how this quickly adds up, and we can offer additional social value to our customer, and then they can report it up the chain to their investors, to private equity, and it all helps that flow of data. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. Okay, so in terms, we've now got three little case studies here, or three presentations from members. We're all doing it slightly differently. We're all doing it in the ways that we as businesses can afford to do it, but we're also going through a journey, and the journey is one of learning what we can do, learning from others. That's the purpose of this. Looking for examples of what good looks like, and seeing how we, whatever our shape of business, whatever the size of business we have, and looking what does good look like, and can we aspire to be good? Now, we can't make radical change. Even a company like Adrenaline, which is one of the largest companies with the largest of our members, I mean, they can't radically change their tanker fleet, but they can start looking at potential for, as they invest in new equipment, new plant, new equipment, new vans, new vehicles, they can look at what is the option that suits our business profile going forward. And so I would say, try and engage your staff, because your staff will have ideas. Engage your clients, talk to your clients about what they want, what they perceive as what does sustainability look like to them in the way that you work with them. And try and come and look at how you as a business can put some simple metrics in place whereby you can see if you're making an improvement. Now, if many of you who will have some form of environmental accreditation, it used to be 14,001, I think it's changed to something different now, but if you have that, you will have within your business an environmental improvement plan. And see if you can put some scores against that, some targets. And using simple analysis, which is, and Dan has described the way that Adrenaline do it, you might have different ways whereby you measure your environmental footprint. But see if you can measure your environmental footprint and see if it improves through the changes that you make through your environmental improvement plan. It's important to have your staff buying into this, because ultimately, if you're all managers, it's not you who orders the equipment from the hire company. But actually, if you talk to your hire company and say, look, we're looking, you know, what is more sustainable? And some hire companies are significantly making significant investments in more sustainable equipment. In other words, equipment which perhaps has solar panel lighting units which have solar panels on it, and actually the solar panels will generate power which goes into the batteries. Yeah, it may not run 24 hours a day, but it may run 8 hours of a day. So you've actually saved a third of the emissions that would normally come out of using that lighting unit. Things like that. If you're looking at hiring a welfare unit, hire one which has got solar panels on the top of it. It's charging batteries. Yeah, it means the generator runs for less time, and make sure that the generator can run off HVO. A slight price premium, but it's a more sustainable solution. So just think about that, but engage with your clients, because I think that the more that we talk about sustainability, the better educated we all become. So that's some thoughts from us. And this is why, and the reason it's important to your clients is if your clients are larger businesses, they will have their own goals. Their environmental and sustainable performance is being measured by their investors, as Dan has said, or by their shareholders. And I think in spill response, the reason we got into spill response was generally we wanted to make the environment better than it was yesterday. So in a sense, we're already halfway along this journey. And as managers within our businesses, we need to inspire our employees to also be on that journey to help make our environment better. So that's enough from me. Now, what I'm going to do is open the floor to any questions if anybody has them. So please feel free to ask whatever questions you want of our speakers. This is where we get silence, but you don't have to have silence. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Hello, this is, can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I'm a little bit, how can you say, concerned that innovation hasn't actually been mentioned very much. I've got a particular interest in this, in that I'm heavily involved in bioremediation of basically hydrocarbon spills. And the interest shown in the spill industry is very little in the product itself. I'm just wondering why that would be.
Okay, and we've got a number of members who and I don't think you're a member of our association, but we have a number of members who are, and I would say, and some of them are on this call today, and they have bioremediation products. And I think there is a real appetite within our organization. And Duncan has, in a sense, used an example, as has Rory, of where they haven't just gone for simply digging it all out and disposing of it at a hazardous landfill site. I think we're all driven now not to do that, or to do that for the minimum possible amount necessary to achieve the goals of remediating the project and making the project making the project work. So I think we are all looking to bioremediation solutions where they are appropriate and where they're safe to use, and where ultimately the regulator or the and it may not be the regulator, it may be the local authority, or indeed the environmental consultant that might be overseeing the project, particularly if it's a major company. So they have to have confidence in it through the different chain. And I would say that there is greater use of bioremediation products going on now. Rory, Duncan, have you got any comment you want to make on that?
Well, just in terms of bioremediation, I mean, that's been available and on the market, and I've been using that for over 20 years. But there's innovations within that particular form of remediation. You know, the sorts of the types of approaches, the sorts of stimulants that are used, etc., etc. So innovation is. I'm sorry if that didn't come across in my talk. I know that Rory did mention technology and R&D, and that's very much the case for us as well. but innovation is at the heart of everything that we do, trying to do things more just clever and better. Right?
It's just that we've been banging on for about 2 years about this bioremediation product, and it's had quite good response in some market areas. For example, national highways are looking at launching it nationally across the motorway network, simply because they carried out some trials, and out of 22 bioremediation products, ours came out at number 1. It's also the most environmentally friendly.
Well, I'd love to hear more about it, Tony. If you've got some information.
Oh, I'm more than happy to send information.
Tony, why don't you put something in chat, and just then people can link to it?
Yeah.
And then if they're interested, they can pick it up. If not, then, but I would encourage you to become a member of the association.
Well, strangely enough, I tried around about 2 years ago.
But it wasn't while I was while I was the executive director. So do get in touch. info@ukeirespill.org. Yeah, and we would welcome you as members.
Okay, yeah. It's just I tend to think that it's very much a closed shop to some degree.
Okay,
they don't welcome.
I think the fact that we have so many webinars and we're so open with what we do, I think those that may not be the current view.
Okay. Well, I'll look at that. But yeah, I'll put my contact details in the chat. It's okay. I just well, I mean, cards on the table. I've actually had meetings with Alder and Allen and RSK, and nothing has come of it.
Okay, fine. Maybe we could actually take another question.
Yeah.
If there's one out there.
Yeah, it's Graham here. I've got a question. Aside of the innovation, how do we think proactivity in recognizing environmental risk plays into our market? Because this actually touches to what Tony was saying on a lot of bioremediation, where we often see a lot of clients sitting on something until they absolutely have to do something, as opposed to they know there's a problem there and the problem is getting bigger, but no one wants to get proactively, involved. And one of our big experiences on that is, decommissioning of major oil refineries or oil transfer depots when they're historically contaminated. In reality, decontamination programs could have probably started with a 5-year heads up before the plant is decommissioned, but everyone tends to push it until the final point. Is there some educational drive we can push around getting people to treat it more proactively than reactively?
Well, I mean, Dan and Rory might have something to say on this, but my initial comment is the best incentive for doing that is the cost. Because you leave it to the last minute and you have to do things, then you're going to have less option for innovation and efficiencies, and it's just going to cost you 3 times more. And that's the biggest sort of driver I would have thought out of all of them. And it is around education, then, isn't it, Graham? Just making people aware of it.
It's a very interesting point you make, because as we move towards net zero, we're going to have so much fuel infrastructure that will be decommissioned. Certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot of work being done in this area. And what we need to do is we need to inform everybody about the risks associated with that, about not decommissioning things properly and the impacts that they could have, about whether you uncover historical contamination or whether you contribute to further contamination as well. So decommissioning is going to be very, very active in the next decade, but it needs to be done properly.
Yeah, there are considerable risks in doing it wrong, and the more time Graham, you're right, the more time people have to plan, the better. The issue sometimes is that there are people who don't want to reveal this condition of their sites whilst they're hopefully going to sell them. And that actually does sometimes come into it, and that is an issue. So yeah, I think that is an issue. Rory, if you can put your contact details into chat, and Dan, I don't think I've done yours very well because I was talking when I was typing, and I'm too old now to multitask.
No worries.
Yeah, so if you pop yours in, then people can pick up. Any other questions? Okay, well, couple of things, other things I'd like to mention. Look out for our press releases and stuff like that, which you'll see on our website. And we will be mailing out when the TV program goes live. That should be in February or March. Everyone who's registered for this webinar will be sent information about the next webinar, which will be on sustainability. And that'll be more about planning tools that we could use. It's taking what Dan was saying a little bit further, and we'll give some examples of what some of our members are using to plan their work and work packages. So that will come out in April. In the meantime, you're very welcome to feedback information to me, info@ukeirespill.org, and I'll cascade it around our members. So sustainability is something we're really interested in, really working quite hard on, and hopefully the experience of our members can help inform you and help you along your own sustainability journey. Now, this is being recorded, so it will be stuck up on our website in our sustainability area, which is we're creating at the moment. You go into knowledge base, and you'll see knowledge base, and then you'll see sustainability underneath, and there'll be a page of blurb with links to each of our webinars as we do them. And so sometime next week you'll see the webinar up there. You'll be able to access it, share it with with whomever you wish. And thanks very much indeed for attending. I'd like to thank our speakers. It's never easy speaking. I do it a lot, but not everybody does. Rory's getting very practiced at it. but Dan and Duncan, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for attending. And have a good day and enjoy sustainability. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.